which goes more about the teaching and the learning that goes into play with that. So if you have comments while we're going or anything, questions, maybe you're kind of all understanding this since we've talked about it before, but just let me know. So, but if we take a look at like what learning looks like for growth and development, right? And pedagogy is the learning, like how kids and adolescents learn and grow and develop. So as teachers, we have to know pedagogy, which is like how to teach kids as they're growing and developing. So all these are different principles that are important for kids, especially young kids learning. And so as you look at these, I don't know if it's kind of common sense or makes sense as we've kind of gone through things, right? But orderly sequence, talk about that. Like you wouldn't teach a kid to multiply before they know how to divide, or I mean to add, right? And to ever subtract and those types of things. So we want to make sure things are somewhat in an orderly sequence as they're growing and developing, and teaching them how to do things. So of course that we want kids to be safe and secure. And with early childhood, it's not just the academic component that we're teaching, but it's all like physical, all different. Active is important, right? We would not want young kids to sit for even half an hour, but hours and hours on end to try to teach them to do something. And we do know that physical experience and social interaction are a big component for early childhood. And even I believe as adults, the experience in doing something is much more beneficial than just reading it or sitting here listening, and engaging in a conversation is better about it than just jumping in and doing it. So mastery and challenge, different learning profiles, play and active, right? So we'll talk about this a little bit at the end too, but mastery and challenge, if you remember me talking about, now I just lost my train of thought on that. The zone of proximal development. Yeah, so that kind of goes along to the mastery and challenge piece, right? Where we're trying to get kids to understand those things, to master them, challenge them a little bit, but not too hard, but yet not too easy. So, okay. So in terms of teaching things, how do you decide what do you know what you should be teaching in early childhood? Well, if we're looking at Head Starts and preschools, those areas, you're going to have some form of curriculum that you will follow. There is also, of course, standards that we have in each state, in each area, and in different programs. There's not like a universal standard, and the United States doesn't have that for anything really. But like South Dakota has some early learning guidelines. North Dakota has early learning guidelines. Head Start has guidelines that they follow. So we're not out there on their own. Now in daycare, you might kind of be, I don't want to say on your own, but you've got more flexibility in terms of what you're doing a little bit with those kids. So standards are good, but then standards can also sometimes be restrictive a little bit. But subject matter areas, probably touching with kids on as many as possible. Sciences, the language components, whatever that might be. I would say social studies, but that can be connected into language. I mean, there's lots of different things that we connect to. So kids' interest is always a big piece or a big guider for or guidance that we can use for helping them to understand or teach them things. If a bunch of your kids are interested in horses, maybe you do things in regards to horses or whatever it might be. So they can really guide and help you pull things together too. If you're looking for extra material, extra ways to kind of keep them interested. So we talked about teaching and learning standards. Like I said, early learning standards. Both states have early learning guidelines. So there's definitely those that we can follow as well. And then content standards as you get into kindergarten, first, second, there's more focus on those content, which is the language arts, the reading, social studies, science, etc. And those. And then performance standards would be those things that physically like children can do, right? Throwing, kicking, jumping, running, you know, all those different components as well. I kind of talked about these, I guess, already in terms of where we get those from. If you heard me talk of NACE before, which is National Association for the Education of Young Children, that's a big, large national organization that promotes early childhood education. They have standards that they promote. They have things that they share with states, with schools, with community. I mean, all kinds of stuff. They're a very very large, kind of powerful organization. Even they have the ability to like try to influence legislation at the federal level, at the Congress and stuff. So they're a good organization that you can you can be a member of them. They have national conferences, which is something that I would like to send us to at some point. But let's see if we can get to that. So anyway, there's a lot of different professional societies or organizations, but NACE is the biggest from that. Like I said, the North and South Dakota Departments of Education have standards and early learning guidelines that they can follow. Some school districts even have specific standards for their early childhood programs. Example, like if a preschool would exist in school, and some schools do have preschools, they might have a set of standards specifically for that preschool that they set. We had experience looking at standards, working through standards at all. I can't remember off the top of my head if we've done some of those. We talked about some of those in some of the other classes. I think we did. But yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. I figured so. What's that? Yeah. Yep. So you're no stranger. Okay. And typically the standard, I mean, you have like, as you get into, teaching lessons and units and more of those things, you have like flexibility within those standards, right? It tells you like what the kids can learn, and then you get the opportunity to decide how you want to teach it, what you want to incorporate, with those components. So that goes back to, kids' interest in activities or topics and those things as well. So depending upon, again, their age, what's developmentally appropriate for them as well. So again, some things that you might ask before you teach a lesson or work with kids. So like, what do children already know? And so do you have any ideas or thoughts about what are some ways that we can get, that we can figure out or find out what children know about a topic already? Yeah. Right. Perfect. Yep. Easy. Yeah. Easy way to do that. Then you can you can keep track of some tally marks, or you can put things up there. Awesome. Yep. So, we know that firsthand experience, which we were talking about, like going out and doing things or experiencing them. That's a great way to do that. So how can you do that with that? So good. You have good ideas on some ways to figure that out. Okay. Planning, the fun part that goes into teaching, right? Thinking about what we're going to do and different things that we can do. Okay, so one thing that I think is kind of interesting here, and that I previously as a teacher had struggled with in different things. So sensory engagement. Okay? So basically, if we think of our senses, right, feeling, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, etc., that is a super great way, super good way to engage kids, right, with the learning experience. So things like water tables or sand tables or whatever it might be. So the thing that I didn't really anticipate or struggle with was the mess that they would cause. They're still good, but right, you got to put some parameters in there, teach kids how to use them, but so on and so forth. So the planning component for that, you want to think about that. So environmental cues, right? Things from your classroom, outside, all those different things, cues that you can use to share with students, to point out, to have them learn, from that. So as the music is playing, I'm thinking about, okay, that's a cue. What could I use from that? I mean, I don't know what I could, but it doesn't have to be something that just pops up. But I know that we have this yellow wall in here in this classroom. So maybe I'm talking about colors. What colors make yellow? Is yellow a prime color? Whatever we think about colors, but so different things like that, or when you're outside for a walk and play in the playground, those types of things. So those are important ways to plan out as well. And then task analysis. So what is the activity that they're doing? What is the task that they're doing? How am I going to assess them, observe them, analyze? What's that process? If you're going to do observation of each kid and you have 15 kids, are you going to do it all at once? You're going to do that activity 5 times during the week, so you have to plan that out, as well. If it takes you 5 minutes at each kid to observe them and assess them, you're going to have to spend quite some time doing that. So again, another thing to think of and then plan out, which looks like you have some understanding. Yeah. Okay, strategies considered in advance but used when children are on scene: chaining and successive approximation, scaffolding, guided practice, repetition. So all 3 of these are somewhat similar. So scaffolding, right, is building upon knowledge, building upon understanding, or an example of math, you start with one topic, you need to understand that before you can move to the next one, those types of things. Chaining and successive approximation is the same type of thing. It's kind of the order of the process that you're going to teach something, or that you're going to have them learn or experience it. And then guided practice, of course, is where you're working with them to probably learn something new, right? Or maybe they're struggling with something, so you're helping them along the way. A poor example of when I think of guided practices, like in our math classes from upper elementary and middle school, when the teacher did problems on the board, and then they had us, do 50 problems of the same, or whatever it is, where you do a lot of repetition, not try to understand it and figure it out. So this could be on anything. It could be on, physical skills or physical skills that kids are learning to do or try to do, or it could be, academic, social skills, whatever it might be. So again, I think these are probably somewhat common, right, or common sense in terms of like verbal things we do with kids, with adults, with everybody, but some different strategies that we can use. Invitations, behavior reflections, really. So when we talk about like these behavior and paraphrase reflections, where we're trying to like change, right? If there's a behavior that we don't, that we see that we don't want the kid to do, or reflection or reflecting them away from that. It could be, please don't do that. And, please don't run, instead of for that you walk in the hallway, or whatever that might be. Rather than just stop that, right? Or don't do that. We always want to try to change or let them know what we prefer them to do, whether it's, their behavior or maybe whatever it might be. But the reflections is where we're getting the child to think about what they're doing a little bit and how they can change that. Modeling, of course, is demonstrating what we want them to do, whether it's behavior, whether it's an activity, how this is how I want you to play at the fan table so you don't make a mess, or whatever that is also. And then effective praise, of course, is important, right? We don't always want to just talk to kids when they're misbehaving or doing something wrong or correct them, but we want to give positive praise, and then always make sure that it's specific to do that. Good job is okay, but why was it good job? Good job, I like how you put your toys away after we were done picking up like I asked you questions on those or other comments, experiences? Telling, explaining, informing, right? There might be a time for sharing, discussing, explaining how to do an activity, event. Do it signals, so starting and stopping, right? That can be a variety of things, flickering the lights, a certain chant or a phrase, which is they use a lot in the school setting, right? 1, 2, eyes on me, 3, 4, eyes on you. Anyway, it rhymes, things like that usually. Right? So, of course, then questions. Always asking kids questions, having them respond. How do they respond? Do they raise their hand? Do they just shout out the answer? But verbal teaching strategies are really going to be something that you'll do a lot of with young kids. It doesn't mean that you're standing up here lecturing, but it might mean that they're doing an activity, they're at the circle, they're at the mat, whatever, and your do it signals or your questioning components. How you get their attention is important too, because if they're all doing an activity or they're busy, that's loud. What can we do to get their attention if we need to tell them something, right? Rather than hollering or really raising our voice, super loud, which we'll have to do some from time to time. But, if they know that we flicker the lights, they'll know to find us. Silence is a good use of teaching also. Right? If you have experienced that before, where a teacher maybe they were talking or something and no one was listening, and then they just stopped and got quiet, and then all of a sudden kids are and then it stops. So that can be used effectively also. But yeah, it shows here some different times we can use that. I also use silence, like sometimes when we ask questions, right? And we just are quiet for 5 seconds. I mean, it seems like a long time, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but that just gives kids opportunities to think a little bit and process stuff too. So, and then this is that zone of proximal development example that I was talking about. I don't know who Irma is, but right in here is kind of that area where they should typically grow and develop if we're building developmentally appropriate activities in that middle range there. They're going to be challenged a little bit, but it's not going to be too hard for them where they can't do it and they get frustrated and give up. And then, of course, on this end, it's too easy for them to do that. So, questions, comments, any ideas or connections to things